Hey, my friend. Tonight we're diving into a history that's as dull as it is mysterious. Close your eyes for a moment, let your body unwind, and let's venture to where dreams are born, where humanity dared to build beyond booms, busts, wars, and wounds. Picture waking in a tent woven from dried grass, the Nevada sun piercing through the gaps like spears, stabbing your eyes. No curtains, no fan, just dry heat crawling over your skin, whispering, "Today, I'll test you." You're Kyle, an ordinary member of the Tahi tribe, living by the shimmering yet treacherous Truckee River. Thousands of years ago, your ancestors erected colossal red stone temples in Black Rock Valley, where gods are said to watch every human step. But don't fantasize about epic sagas. A day here isn't about gold or glory. It's a gritty fight to survive. Sweat, dust, and trembling prayers under the gods' unseen gaze. Before you can stir, the sun turns your tent into a furnace. At dawn, it's already 33 degrees outside. You lie on a coarse flaxen mat, flimsy as an unkept promise. The Truckee River, glorified in old tales, offers no cool breeze. It flows silently, carrying the scent of mud and memories of dry seasons. You stretch, joints cracking, and step out. The desert doesn't welcome, it assaults. Sunlight scorches your shoulders, slicing through your thin flax shirt like wet paper. Tonight, I want you to imagine being Kyle, living a day in this world. No phone, no morning coffee, no notion of comfort. Just you, the heat, and the Tahi's harsh rules. If you're listening, pause for a second, close your eyes, and feel it. Heat clings to your skin. Sand crunches underfoot. How long could you last? Let me guide you through this journey, step by step, to see if your heart can withstand Nevada's sun. You shuffle from the tent, bare feet meeting ground hot as embers. No shoes, unless you're a redstone temple priest. For Kale, the only shield is calloused souls, earned from years roaming the desert. You head to the Truckee, where the tribe gathers each morning to fetch water, bathe, and face reality. The river glints under the sun, but don't be fooled by its beauty. The water's murky, reeking of dead fish and silt. Flies buzz like an uninvited choir, swarming you as if you're their feast. Bathing here isn't relaxing. You kneel by the bank, scrubbing your skin with fine sand, the desert soap, cleaning while leaving tiny scratches on your hands. You dunk your flax shirt in the water, slapping it against rocks, praying it doesn't tear. Upstream, someone's dumped waste, and you try not to dwell on it. A fish darts by, its silver flash tempting, but it's both potential dinner and danger. Crocodiles don't lurk here, but venomous water snakes do. One bite, and your day could end early. You look up, seeing others in the tribe, family, neighbors, even sand cows grazing dry grass nearby. No one demands privacy. They work, chat, laugh, as if heat and dust are old companions. An old woman balances a water jug on her head, striding steadily like she's dancing with the desert. A child chases a sparrow, laughter echoing. You breathe deeply, trying to mimic their resilience. But deep down, you know, today won't be easy. Back at the tent, you set the water jug on the dirt floor, careful not to spill. Kale's home is sparse. Stacked stone walls, a thatched grass roof, and a small corner for offerings to Solus, the Tahi sun god. You kneel before the tiny altar, whispering prayers for strength to endure the day. Here, gods aren't distant. They dwell in the sunlight, the wind, the sand clinging to your skin. Offend them, and you could lose everything: food, health, even your soul. The heat now grips your chest, squeezing tight. The sun doesn't just shine, it rules, a merciless king demanding absolute submission. You gaze toward the red stone temples of Black Rock Valley, looming in the desert. They're the Tahi's pride, built to honor the gods, but also a reminder: you're a speck in their grand design. What will you do today to survive? Fetch water, labor, or simply keep your body from melting under Solus's glare? As you prepare to leave, a hot gust sweeps through, flinging fine sand into your hair and eyes. You squint, breathing slowly, stifling a cough. The desert never sleeps. It lives, breathes, and always tests. But Kael isn't the first to face it. The Tahi have thrived for centuries, turning hardship into a survival art. Today, you're part of that story. Or you fail, and the desert swallows your name. Dust crunched under Kael's feet as he stepped from the tent, a heavy water jug weighing on his shoulder. The Nevada desert didn't wait. It summoned, its parched voice echoing through red rock hills, urging him to join the Tahi tribe's relentless rhythm. The sun, now high, was no longer a spear, but a hammer, striking merciless blows. The Truckee River shimmered in the distance, but Kael had no time to dream of cool water. Today, he'd labor, sweat, and pray that Solus, the sun god, wouldn't turn away. Kael headed to the arid field by the riverbank, where cracked earth resembled a snake's shed skin. He wasn't a hunter or priest, just a tiller, a small piece in the Tahi's survival mosaic. His task: plant millet seeds, uproot weeds, and pray drought wouldn't devour next season's hope. His tools were simple: a sharpened stone sickle, a worn wooden hoe, and hands calloused from toil. Kneeling, the scorching soil seared his knees, as if the desert whispered, "You belong to me." The field wasn't quiet. Shouts from Torin, the towering overseer, boomed like thunder. Torin wasn't just a manager, he was the god's enforcer, tasked with driving everyone to exhaustion. "Hurry, Kael!" he roared, his leather whip slicing the air. Kael bowed his head, avoiding eye contact. Here, complaining was a sin. Challenging Torin was like defying Solus himself. One wrong word, and you'd be bound under the sun, left for divine judgment. Kael drove the hoe into the earth, each strike steady but laborious. Every millet seed sown was a fragile promise, reliant on the Truckee and the gods' whims. Dust swirled, clogging his hair and nose, triggering a hacking cough. He wiped sweat, but it flowed again, an endless stream. Around him, others toiled, backs bent. Mara, an elderly woman, murmured prayers while planting. A boy, barely 10, hauled water from the river, his small shoulders trembling under the load. The heat had become a living beast, coiling around Kael, squeezing his chest. He looked up, hoping for a cloud, but the sky was a cruel, unblemished blue. Red rocks at the hill's base glinted, like eyes watching. Kael tried to imagine himself part of something grand. This field fed the tribe, sustained the redstone temple, pleased the gods. But reality was harsher. He worked to survive, to avoid Torin's lash, to keep the desert from crushing him. By noon, the ground could bake bread. Kyle paused, leaning on his hoe, gasping short breaths. He glanced at the redstone temple in Black Rock Valley, its carved eagle and wolf motifs, symbols of Solus and the earth goddess Mati, standing resolute, a reminder, the gods demand, always. Kyle wasn't zealously devout, but he believed. How could he not, with the sun blistering his flesh and the Truckee's threat to dry up? He whispered a prayer for Mati's fertile soil and Solus's leniency. A hot gust whipped through, flinging sand into Kyle's eyes like needles. He blinked rapidly, fighting the sting. Here, sand wasn't just dust. It was companion, foe, part of you. It crept into clothes, clung to skin, even seasoned food. Kyle was used to the grit between his toes, but today it felt heavier, as if the desert were swallowing him bit by bit. Torin barked, granting a brief rest. Kyle slumped under a boulder, the closest thing to shade. He pulled a scrap of millet bread from a cloth bag, biting into its dry, sand-flecked texture that grated his teeth. A reminder of the Earth Mother. He sipped warm, muddy water from the jug, not a meal, but fuel to last until dusk. A mosquito landed on his arm. Kyle swatted it, but it returned, as relentless as the desert. He watched the others. Mara, her gaunt hands still sewing, eyes resolute as if she'd bested the desert 1,000 times. The water-hauling boy rested, his sparkling yet weary gaze. Kyle wondered if the boy would grow to till like him, or, luckier, carve stone at redstone. Here, fate wasn't yours to choose. The land, the gods, and men like Torin decided it. As the sun tilted west, Kale rose, legs aching but not daring to dawdle. The work wasn't done. The field needed dozens more millet rows, and Torin was never satisfied. Gripping the sickle, he yanked weeds, each motion a defiance to the desert. "I'm still here." But deep down, Kale knew the truth. The desert always won, patient, immortal, while he was a fleeting breath under Solus's gaze. The sun hung suspended over Black Rock Valley, a blazing orb that never blinked, as if debating whether to incinerate Kale on the spot. He knelt in the parched field, fingers gripping a stone sickle, yanking weeds with motions etched deep into his muscles. Sweat streamed down, dripping onto the earth, vanishing as if it never existed. The Nevada desert knew no mercy. It devoured every trace of humanity, from sweat to dreams. But Kyle didn't stop. He couldn't. The Tahi tribe survived on this field, and the field survived on his hands. Or so Torin, the overseer, always roared. Sand clung to Kyle's skin, creeping into the folds of his flaxen shirt, like a curse that couldn't be scrubbed away. He was used to it, or rather, he'd learned to ignore it. But today, the sand felt heavier, each grain a reminder of his smallness before the desert. He glanced up toward the redstone temple, where red stone walls carved with eagles and snakes glinted under the sun. It was the heart of the Tahi world, where priests prayed to Solus, the sun god, and Mara, the earth goddess, where the tribe's fate was sealed. Kyle had never set foot inside. He was just a tiller, unworthy of touching sacred stone. Yet he felt its weight, like an invisible hand gripping his throat. Torin strode by, leather whip coiled around his hand, eyes sharp as a blade. "Move faster, Kale!" he barked. Kale bowed his head, feigning focus on the weeds. But inside, a small flame flickered, a dangerous thought. Why? Why must he toil under Torin's glare, under Solus's gaze, under the tribe's expectations? The thought flared, then died, swallowed by the desert. Here, questioning was taboo. Torin wasn't just an overseer. He was a bridge to the gods, chosen to enforce their will. Slandering him, even in a whisper, could see Kyle bound in the desert, left for the sun's judgment. Or worse, dragged to Redstone, where traitors vanished forever. Kale kept working, rhythmic but burdened. Each sickle swipe was a silent prayer, begging Mara for fertile soil, pleading with Solus not to torch the field. Around him, others labored in silence. Mara, the elderly woman, now rested under a boulder, her trembling hands clutching a water jug. Jiro, the water-hauling boy, staggered under his load, never daring to pause. Kyle wanted to help, but he knew the rules. Every man for himself. The desert spared no weakness, and neither did Torin. A searing gust swept through, flinging fine sand into Kale's eyes. He blinked, fighting the needle-like sting. Here, sand wasn't just dust. It was part of you, weaving into hair, grinding between teeth, even haunting sleep. Kale had once dreamed of being buried in sand, his body dissolving, merging with the desert. He shuddered, banishing the image. He didn't want to think of death, but in Tahi, death was ever present. It lurked in the Truckee's currents, in sandstorms, in Torin's gaze. The midday break arrived, fleeting as a breath. Kyle slumped back against a scorching boulder. He pulled out a millet loaf, dry and gritty with sand. Each bite was a small battle, his teeth grinding against tiny grains, as if chewing the earth mother herself. He sipped warm, earthy water, trying to ignore the Truckee's muddy tang. A mosquito landed on his arm. He swatted it, but it returned, relentless as fate. Around him, others ate in silence. Mara murmured a prayer, lips barely moving. Jiro curled up, eyes staring far off, perhaps dreaming of a sandless world. Kyle's gaze drifted to Redstone, where priests prepared the afternoon ritual. He'd never seen them, but he knew they were different, clad in pristine flax robes, free of sand, anointed with rare, fragrant oils Kale only heard of. They lived in the temple's shade, communing with gods, while Kale and his kind sweated under the sun. He didn't envy them. He feared them. Priests bridged the divine, and the divine weren't always kind. A drought, a sandstorm, a misspoken curse, any could signal Solus's wrath. And when Solus raged, the whole tribe paid. He stood, legs throbbing but not daring to linger. Torin was back, eyes sweeping the field like a hawk. Kyle gripped the sickle, resuming his weeding, each motion a defiance to the desert. I'm still alive. But deep within, he felt his fragility. He was Kale, a tiller, a speck in the gods' grand scheme. He worked, he prayed, He survived. But for how long? The desert didn't answer. It watched, patient, waiting. A drumbeat echoed from afar, deep and resonant, like the very heartbeat of the Nevada desert. Kyle froze, his stone sickle hovering above the weeds. The sound came from the red stone temple, where priests began the evening ritual, summoning Solis, the sun god, and Mara, the earth goddess, to bear witness. Across the barren field by the Truckee River, everyone lifted their heads, eyes flickering with a mix of fear and reverence. Kyle felt his chest tighten, not from the heat, but from the weight of the gods. Here, in the world of the Tahi tribe, divinity wasn't a fireside tale. The gods were the breath of the earth, the blaze of the sky, the law carved into red stone. Kyle wiped sweat from his brow, sand sticking to his hands like a reminder. He'd never truly be clean. He resumed work, yanking weeds with mechanical motions, but his mind drifted to the temple. He'd never witnessed the rituals, but he knew they happened. Priests in pristine white flax robes, their skin shimmering with sacred oils, offered millet loaves, palm wine, and, whispers said, sometimes the blood of sacred sand bison. A shiver ran through Kyle. Blood was the god's language, and Solis, with his fiery gaze, was ever thirsty. Torin, the overseer, passed by, his leather whip dangling at his hip. He didn't shout this time, but his obsidian-sharp eyes swept over Kale and the others. Kale bowed his head, pretending to focus. In Tahi, power didn't rest solely with priests. It flowed through men like Torin, chosen to enforce the Redstone Temple's will. They were Solis's hands, Mara's voice. To defy them was to defy the world's order, called Ara, the balance of earth, sky, and humanity. Break Ara, and the desert would swallow you, or worse, you'd face the temple's divine judgment. Kyle thought of Ara as he planted a millet seed in the cracked earth. Each seed was a vow, not just for the harvest, but for the tribe's survival. He whispered a prayer, beseeching Mara for fertile soil, pleading with Solis to spare the hunt. Here, every act was a ritual. Bathing by the Truckee, he prayed the water god wouldn't rage. Eating millet bread, he offered a crumb to the earth. Sleeping under a straw roof, he sought protection from dream-stalking spirits. Faith wasn't a choice. It was Kyle's breath, the cord binding him to the desert. He glanced at Mara, the elderly woman resting under a boulder. She clutched a small stone amulet carved with a snake, murmuring prayers. Mara, the tribe's storyteller, had filled Kyle's nights with tales of the afterlife. When you died, your soul faced Mara's council, where gods tallied your sins. Your heart was weighed against scales. If it sank, laden with lies, theft, or defiance, Kale, a serpent-headed beast with a jaguar's body, would devour your soul. No afterlife awaited, only oblivion. Kyle gripped the sickle tighter, shuddering. He didn't want to dwell on Kyle, but in Tahi, death was ever present, like Solis's shadow on the sand. Sand swirled upward, carried by a scorching gust, stinging Kyle's eyes. He blinked, battling the burn. Sand wasn't mere dust here. It was a constant companion, weaving into clothes, tangling in hair, even tainting meals. Kyle was used to its grit between his teeth, but today it unsettled him. He saw Jiro, the water-hauling boy, staggering under a heavy jug. Kyle longed to help, but the law held firm. Each bore their own burden. The desert forgave no weakness, and Torin's eyes were watching. Another drumbeat from Redstone pulsed, faster, like a warning. Kyle's chest vibrated with its rhythm. He didn't know today's ritual, but its gravity pressed upon him. Perhaps the priests were praying for rain. Perhaps they were offering gifts to appease Solus. Or maybe, Kale shivered, they were choosing a sacrifice. Whispers spoke of drought years when Redstone demanded more than bread or bison blood. Kale pushed the thought away, but it clung, like sand in his palm. Torin commanded work to resume. Kyle stood, legs aching, and gripped the sickle. He weeded, planted, each motion a defiance of the desert. "I'm still here." But a small crack formed within him. He toiled to survive, to uphold Ara, to escape Solus's wrath. But what if Ara wasn't meant for him? What if he was just a grain of sand, swept away by the wind, leaving no trace? He stared at Redstone, where the drums still sounded, and wondered, did the gods truly see him, or was he merely a shadow beneath their fiery gaze? Kale felt the sand beneath his fingertips, fine yet sharp, as if the Nevada desert were whispering an ancient secret. He knelt on the barren field by the Truckee River, stone sickle in hand, pulling weeds with a rhythm woven into his body. The sun, now tilting westward, still scorched, its light a crimson orange, like blood seeping over stone. The drums from the Redstone temple had fallen silent, leaving a heavy stillness, as if Solus, the god, held his breath, watching. Kyle didn't dare look up. He knew Torin, the overseer, lurked nearby, and in the Tahi tribe, slowness invited the sting of a whip. Sand was Kyle's constant companion. It didn't just cling to his skin, tangle in his hair, or grit the millet loaf he ate at noon. It was part of him, like blood in his veins. With each step, sand slid under his bare feet, scraping his calloused soles, as if to say, "You can't escape me." When he sowed millet seeds, sand mingled with the soil, blurring the line between fertile and barren. When he wiped sweat, sand stuck to his hands, leaving streaks like a canvas of pain. Kyle had learned to live with it, but today it felt alive, crawling up his skin, seeking to claim him. He thought of his home, a straw tent by the Truckee's edge. Sand spared nothing there. It crept through gaps in the stone walls, dusting the dirt floor, coating the flaxen mat where he slept. Each morning, Kyle swept it out, but by night it returned, an uninvited guest. Even in dreams, sand haunted him. He'd once dreamed of being buried, sand flooding his mouth, his eyes, until he was no longer Kale, just part of the desert. Shuddering, he banished the image and kept weeding. Torin passed by, his gaze searing like a hot gust. "No daydreaming, Kale," he growled, voice booming like falling rock. Kale bowed his head, feigning busyness, but inside, a small flame flared, then died. He wanted to scream, to demand why he lived this way, bent under the sun, breathing dust, praying to gods who never answered. But he knew the cost. In Tahi, Questioning was blasphemy. Torin wasn't just an overseer. He embodied Ara, the sacred order sustaining the tribe. To break Ara was to invite Solas's wrath, and Kyle lacked the bravery to face that. Around him, others toiled in silence. Mara, the elderly woman, sowed seeds, her trembling hands precise. Jiro, the water-hauling boy, staggered under a heavy jug, his face streaked with sand. Kyle yearned to help, but the law held firm. Each bore their own load. The desert forgave, and Torin was watching. He studied Mara, wondering how long she'd endured this world, how many seasons of sand she'd conquered. As the tribe's storyteller, her tales ended with warnings. Don't defy the gods. Don't disrupt Ara. Don't dream of another life. A gust swept through, carrying fine sand into Kyle's eyes like needles. He blinked, fighting the burn. Here, sand wasn't mere dust. It was a silent enemy, a relentless ally, part of everything. It tainted the millet loaf, wearing down his teeth with each meal. It clung to his flaxen shirt, making every step a small battle with weight. It dusted the field, obscuring the millet rows Kale planted, as if the desert mocked his efforts. Kyle was accustomed to it, but today the sand felt heavier, a curse gripping his soul. He thought of the Redstone Temple, where priests dwelled in shade and scented oils. They didn't know sand like Kyle. Their flaxen robes stayed pristine, untouched by dust. They prayed to Solas, offering loaves and blood, while Kale and his kind sweated in the field. But Kyle didn't envy them. He feared them. Priests bridged the divine, and the divine weren't always merciful. A drought, a sandstorm, a misspoken curse. Any could signal Solas's anger. And when Solas raged, the tribe paid the price. Torin signaled a brief rest. Kale slumped, back against a scorching boulder. He pulled out the last scrap of millet loaf, biting into its gritty, sand-laced texture. He sipped warm, earthy water, trying to ignore the Truckie's muddy tang. A mosquito landed on his arm. He swatted, but it returned, stubborn as fate. He gazed at Redstone, where shadows stretched across its red stone walls. He wondered, did the gods truly see him, or was he just a grain of sand, swept away by the wind, leaving no trace? Beneath the shadow of the Redstone Temple, a hot gust swept through, swirling sand into silent, dancing spirals, as if the Nevada desert were performing a quiet ritual. Kale stood on the barren field by the Truckee River, stone sickle in hand, his gaze drifting over the tender millet rows he'd sown. The cracked earth cradled each seed, like a stern mother promising nothing but survival. The sun, now sloping westward, painted the red hills with blazing orange streaks, like blood seeping from an ancient wound. Kyle breathed slowly, sand crunching under his bare feet, feeling the weight of an unseen gaze. Not Torin's, not Solas's, but that of the Tahi king, the eternal light of the Tahi tribe, ruler of both earth and sky. Kale resumed weeding, his sickle strokes steady but heavy, like the heartbeat of one who knows he's watched. His mind wandered to the Tahi king, a figure he'd never seen yet felt everywhere. In Mara's tales, the king wasn't human, but the embodiment of Ara, the sacred order that kept the Truckee flowing, the earth alive, the tribe intact. Kyle knew him only through rare glimpses during the planting festival, when a golden-robed silhouette gleamed atop Redstone, radiant as a fragment of the sun fallen to earth. To slander him was blasphemy. To question him was to court oblivion. A faint tremor ran through Kyle, not from the heat, the desert knew no gentleness, but from an old story's memory. Mara, her voice trembling by the fire, once spoke of a tiller named Lear, who dared whisper that the Tahi king was merely a man in gold, not divine. Lear vanished soon after. No one knew if he was bound under the sun, taken to the temple, or swallowed by the desert. His name was erased from stories, as if Ara had swept his existence clean. Kyle gripped the sickle tighter, banishing the memory. He wasn't Lear. He wouldn't let the sand bury his name. Torin, the overseer, approached. His leather whip coiled around his hand like a snake poised to strike. "Kale, hurry!" he roared, voice booming like rocks tumbling down a hill. Kale bowed his head, feigning focus on the weeds, but his heart pounded. Torin wasn't just a brute. He was the Tahi king's arm, Solas's eyes on this field. In Tahi, power didn't rest solely in Redstone's temple. It flowed through men like Torin, chosen to keep everyone in line, ensuring Ara remained unbroken. A wrong glance, a careless word, and Kyle could be bound in the desert, left for the sun's judgment. Or worse, dragged to the temple, where the priest's stone knives decided fates. Kale glanced around, seeing others bent under the sun. Mara, her gaunt hands sowing millet, her eyes resolute, as if she'd bested the desert 1,000 times. Jiro, the water-hauling boy, staggered under a heavy jug, his face streaked with sand, never daring to pause. Kyle ached to help, but he knew the law. Each carried their own burden. The desert spared no mercy, and Torin was watching. He thought of Ara, the order the tribe revered. It was why this field existed, why the Truckee still flowed, why the Tahi king was exalted. But Ara was also a chain, binding Kale to an endless cycle of labor, prayer, and fear. Sand rose, carried by a scorching gust, stinging Kale's eyes like needles. He blinked, fighting the burn. Here, sand wasn't mere dust. It was part of Ara, weaving into his flaxen shirt, tangling in his hair, tainting his millet loaf. Kale was used to its grit between his teeth, but today it felt alive, crawling up his skin, seeking to claim him. He wiped sweat, but sand clung to his hands, leaving streaks like a painting of pain. His gaze drifted to Redstone, where shadows stretched across its red stone walls. The priests, in pristine white flax robes shimmering with sacred oils, were closest to the Tahi king. They didn't breathe sand, didn't know Torin's whip. They dwelled in shade, praying to Solas, offering loaves and blood, shaping the tribe's fate. Kyle didn't envy them, he feared them. Priests bridged the divine, and the divine weren't always kind. A drought, a sandstorm, a misspoken curse, any could signal Solas's wrath. And when Solas raged, the tribe paid. Torin barked to resume work. Kyle rose, legs throbbing, and gripped the sickle. He weeded, sowed, each motion a harsh rhythm, like the desert's pulse. Within, A small crack widened, but he suppressed it. He toiled to uphold Ara, to survive, to evade punishment. He stared at Redstone, now cloaked in shadow. A hawk soared past, its sharp cry a warning from Solus. Kyle bowed his head, the sickle trembling in his hand, and kept working, ensuring sand and sun weren't the only things carving his name into the earth. Lyra, Kale's sister, knelt by the Truckee River's edge, her rough hands scrubbing a flaxen cloth against stone. Water splashed, glinting under the fiery Nevada sunset, but her eyes stayed fixed downward. She worked in silence, as she had every day since she was strong enough to carry a jug. Kyle stood a few steps away, stone sickle still in hand, fresh from the barren field to fetch water for their tent. Watching Lyra, a dull ache gripped his chest, not from the heat, but from the truth that her life, though resilient, was an endless chain of toil, shackled by the desert and Ara. The desert didn't discriminate. It scorched men, women, and children with the same merciless flame. But for Tahi women like Lyra, it was cruel in its own way. Kyle recalled early mornings before sunrise, when Lyra rose to grind millet with stone, her hands moving in a somber dance. She hauled water from the river, baked bread, tended sand bison, and wove flax under blistering sun. As a child, Kyle thought Lyra invincible, like Mara, the earth goddess in Mara's tales. Now he saw the creases on her forehead, the calluses on her hands, and the weary eyes hidden behind her smile. Lyra looked up, catching Kyle's gaze. "Don't stand there like a rock," she said, her voice dry but not harsh. Kyle stepped forward, set down his jug, and knelt beside her, helping pound the cloth against stone. The Truckee's water was murky, thick with mud and sand, but it was all they had. Lyra used no soap. Nobody in Tahi knew such a thing. She scrubbed with fine sand as she cleansed herself each morning. Kyle watched her hands, strong yet faintly trembling, and wondered, had Lyra ever dreamed of a day without work? In Tahi, women like Lyra held rights rare among other tribes. Mara once said Lyra could own land, sell flax at Black Rock's market, even bring a man before the council for mistreatment. As a boy, Kyle found it wondrous, imagining Tahi women free as hawks on the hills. But seeing Lyra now, he grasped the bitter truth. Rights didn't banish sand from skin, cool the heat, or grant rest. Lyra toiled from pre-dawn to starlight, not for freedom, but because the tribe needed her, because Ara demanded her. Kyle remembered a time, as a child, when he saw Lyra cry. She sat in their tent, clutching a torn flaxen cloth, shoulders shaking. He asked why, but she shook her head, wiped her tears, and resumed weaving. Later, Mara revealed Lyra had longed to be a storyteller like her, but their father declared it no woman's role. Lyra learned to grind millet, haul water, weave cloth, tasks the desert and Ara assigned her. Kyle's chest tightened. He wanted to scream, to smash his sickle into the earth, but he only bowed his head, helping her pound cloth, silent as the desert. Sand clung to Kyle's hands, wedging under his nails, an unyielding curse. He looked at Lyra, sand sparkling in her hair under the twilight, like tiny jewels. Here, sand was part of everything. Millet loaves, flaxen shirts, even dreams. Kale had heard Mara say sand weaves into Mara's breath, the goddess's way of teaching patience. But for Lyra, sand was a burden, swept daily from her tent, clinging to her woven cloth, wearing her skin day by day. Around them, other women labored by the river. A young mother, Nia, carried her baby on her back, hauling water with gaunt arms. An old woman, eyes dim, scrubbed cloth with slow, precise rhythm. Kyle saw their strength, but also their fragility. Childbirth in Tahi was a gamble. No medicine, no clean rooms, only prayers and midwives like Mara. Lyra had no children, but Kyle knew she feared it. He'd overheard her whispering to Mara, pleading for strength if that day came. Twilight fell, painting Black Rock Valley a deep crimson. Kyle and Lyra carried cloth and water back to the tent, their feet heavy. Inside, Lyra began grinding millet for supper, her hands moving like a ritual. Kyle watched, wanting to say something, a comfort, an apology, but he stayed silent. In Tahi, words didn't shift sand or soften sun. He sat, helping her pick weeds from the millet, feeling Ara's weight pressing on them both. Lyra looked up, her eyes gentle yet resolute. "Tomorrow will be better," she said, more prayer than truth. Kyle nodded, but inside, a small flame flickered. He thought of Lyra, Mara, Nia, the Tahi women, strong yet bound by the desert. He thought of the Tahi king, Solis, Ara, and deep within, not in words, but a profound feeling, he wondered, could there be a day when Lyra wove not for survival, but for herself? Outside, the desert breathed, sand gleaming under a nascent moon, promising that tomorrow it would test them again. Kale's hands trembled as he laid the flaxen cloth on the tent's floor, moonlight slipping through gaps in the dried grass, casting silver streaks across Lyra's pale face. His sister lay there, her breaths shallow, her forehead glistening with sweat despite the Nevada desert's chill under the night sky. A sudden fever had erupted, stripping the strength from Lyra, once as unyielding as the red stone of Black Rock Valley. Kyle knelt beside her, his heart in turmoil, recalling the first time he witnessed a Tahi healer's power, and the fear that gripped him when he realized survival here depended not only on human hands, but on the will of Solis, the sun god, and Mara, the earth goddess. Years ago, Kyle was a boy, too small to wield a sickle. He stood in the shadows of another tent, watching Sura, the healer, save a child bitten by a sand viper. Sura, with silver hair and eyes sharp as a hawk's, mixed honey with crushed dry grass, applying it to the bite while murmuring prayers to Mara. Kyle was awestruck as the swelling subsided, the child stirring awake. But he trembled when Sura placed a stone amulet carved with a snake around the child's neck, warning that without appeasing the snake spirit, the fever would return. Healing in Tahi wasn't just medicine. It was a dance between practicality and mysticism, between mortal hands and divine gazes. Now, in his own tent, Kyle gazed at Lyra, his heart heavy. He'd raced to Sura's tent the moment Lyra collapsed in the field, her breaths ragged as a storm's wind. Sura came, carrying a cloth bag of herbs and stone charms. She knelt by Lyra, touching her forehead, muttering, "This fever isn't ordinary. It may be Solis's wrath." Kyle shuddered. He wanted to ask why, to scream that Lyra had done no wrong, but he stayed silent. In Tahi, questioning a healer was questioning Ara, the sacred order. He stood there, watching Sura work, his mind churning like sand in a gust. Sura blended honey with dried grass leaves, adding ash from a ritual fire to form a thick paste. She spread it on Lyra's chest, whispering prayers, beseeching Mara to cool the fever, pleading with Solis for mercy. Kael didn't understand why prayers were needed. Honey had its own power. He'd seen it heal his own open wound. But Sura insisted that without rituals, medicine was useless. She placed a stone amulet etched with a hawk around Lyra's neck, claiming it would repel evil spirits. Kael stared at the amulet, wondering if it truly protected or merely reminded them the gods were always watching. He thought of the desert's dangers: a viper's bite, a fever, a small cut. Any could kill. In Tahi, there were no medicines like the vague tales of distant tribes. Healers like Sura were all they had, armed with herbs, charms, and prayers. Kael recalled a day when a piercing headache gripped him, and Sura rubbed crushed herbs on his brow, chanting a hymn to Mara. The pain eased, but Kael didn't know if the herbs or the chant held the cure. Survival here was a miracle, and miracles always carried fear. Sand crunched under Kael's feet as he rose to fetch more water from the jug. He poured a trickle into his hand, wiping Lyra's brow, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. He glanced at Sura, yearning to ask if Lyra would recover, but her stern eyes seemed to say, "Don't ask. Trust Ara." Kael bowed his head, heart sinking. He thought of those who hadn't survived: children lost to fever, tillers to infected wounds. In Tahi, teeth wore down from sand in the millet bread, and when infection set in, there was no cure. Sura could extract teeth with a sharp stone, but Kael had heard the screams of those enduring it, and he prayed Lyra wouldn't face that agony. Outside the tent, the desert was silent, save for the wind hissing through the red hills. Kael peered through the straw gaps, glimpsing Redstone's silhouette under the moonlight, looming like a warning. The priests there didn't heal. They offered sacrifices, prayed, and sometimes, whispers said, chose who must die to appease Solis. Kael shuddered, banishing the thought. Lyra wasn't a sacrifice. She was part of Ara, weaving cloth, grinding millet, sustaining the tribe. But he knew, in Tahi, no one was truly safe. Sura rose, placing a hand on Kael's shoulder. "Keep her cool. Pray. If Mara wills it, she'll live." She left, leaving Kael with Lyra and the darkness. He knelt beside his sister, whispering prayers, not from faith, but from fear. He begged Mara to ease the fever, pleaded with Solis for mercy. But within, a crack widened. If Lyra didn't wake, what was Ara worth? If the gods didn't listen, why pray? He clasped Lyra's hand, feeling her faint warmth, and vowed to himself, no matter how harsh the desert, he wouldn't let her go. Under the moonlight, sand glimmered outside the tent, like tiny eyes watching, awaiting fate's next move. Moonlight shattered across the red stones, as if the Nevada desert were whispering secrets of eternity. Kael stood among the Tahi tribe's crowd, steps from the red stone temple, his breath mingling with the low melodic chants of the priests. Tonight was the soul-guiding ceremony, a rare gathering to bid farewell to the soul of a tiller who'd just passed, old Corin, who once taught Kyle to sow millet. Around him, flickering torches lit the weathered faces of Mara, Giro, and Lyra, who'd just survived her fever thanks to Sura's hands. Kyle clutched a small stone amulet carved with a hawk, his heart churning, not just from loss, but from questions about the afterlife, where the tribe believed every soul faced judgment. The ritual began. A priest, his white flax robe shimmering under the moon, raised a stone knife, its gleam flashing like a fallen star. He sliced a piece of flaxen cloth symbolizing Corin's soul and placed it on the stone altar. Chants rose, blending with the wind hissing through Black Rock Valley, as if Mara, the earth goddess, were listening. Kale stared at the altar, adorned with millet loaves, palm wine, and a tiny snake-shaped amulet, a plea to protect Corin on his journey through the dream realm. He trembled, recalling Mara's tales of that place, a shadowy land where souls stood before Mara's council, answering for every deed in life. Kyle thought of Corin, the old tiller with a kind smile and calloused hands. He'd spent his life in the fields, sowing millet, praying for Ara, never questioning the Tahi king or Solis. But was that enough? Mara, her voice quivering by the fire, once said that in the dream realm, your heart was weighed against a feather, symbol of truth and order. If your heart sank, burdened by lies, theft, or defiance, Kale, a serpent-headed beast with a jaguar's body, would devour your soul, erasing you from eternity. Kyle gripped the amulet, his chest tightening. He wondered, how heavy would his own heart be? The priests continued, scattering sand on the altar as if summoning the desert to witness. Kyle watched the sand glint under torchlight, pondering the Tahi's obsession with death. Here, death wasn't an end, but the start of a perilous journey. Every Tahi, from tillers like Kyle to priests, prepared for the afterlife. The wealthy, like Redstone's stone carvers, built small tombs filled with amulets, loaves, and wooden figurines called Ara spirits, believed to labor for them in the dream realm. Kyle and Lyra had no tombs. If they died, a shallow sand pit by the Truckee would be their rest, with a few crumbs of bread and Mara's prayers. Kyle glanced at Lyra beside him, her eyes glowing under the torches. Fresh from her fever, she was still frail, clutching a stone amulet. He knew she, too, thought of death. Last night, as Lyra lay in the tent, her breaths faint, Kyle had prayed to Mara, not from faith, but fear. If Lyra hadn't woken, would her soul have crossed the dream realm? She wove cloth, ground millet, upheld Ara. But Kyle knew no one in Tahi was truly blameless. A wayward word, a rebellious thought, all could weigh down a heart. The ritual pressed on. The priests sang a hymn, their voices rising and falling like the Truckee's waves. They offered millet loaves to the altar, pouring palm wine into the sand, as if nourishing Corin's soul. Kyle watched the sand drink the wine, struck by life's fragility. He toiled in the fields, sweating under the sun, breathing sand to survive. But to what end, if he'd face Kale and Ara's scales? He looked at Mara, the aged storyteller, standing silently, her hands trembling. She'd said the dream realm wasn't just judgment, but a chance. If your heart was light, you'd enter the millet garden, where soil was ever fertile, rivers never dried, and sand didn't sear skin. Cale wanted to believe in the millet garden, but fear gnawed at him. He feared small sins, the times he'd thought of defying Torin, doubted Solus. He glanced at Jiro, the water-hauling boy, huddled by his mother, eyes shimmering yet anxious. Young as he was, Jiro knew death. Tahi children were taught to pray, offer bread, uphold Ara, to keep their hearts light before Mara's council. Kyle wondered, did Jiro fear Kyle, or did he still dream of a sandless world? The ritual ended. The priests lowered the knife, scattering sand one last time, and the crowd dispersed, leaving the altar under moonlight. Kyle took Lyra's hand, guiding her back to the tent, his heart heavy. He thought of Corin, the dream realm, Ara's scales. He longed to live a life light enough to escape Kyle's jaws. But in the Nevada desert, where sand clung to everything, where Solus watched unblinking, that seemed impossible. As they walked, moonlight gleamed on the sand, forming a silver path to the tent, like an invitation for Kyle to carry on, not to live forever, but to face tomorrow. Dawn blazed like a wildfire across the red hills of Black Rock Valley, rousing Cale from fitful sleep on a flaxen mat in his straw tent. He sat up, his thin flaxen shirt clinging to his sweat-soaked skin, sand grating under his palms. The Nevada desert didn't wait. It beckoned with searing heat and buzzing flies, an uninvited chorus. Kyle pulled the shirt over his head, feeling the light but futile fabric against the coming sun. Here, in the Tahi tribe's world, clothing wasn't for display. It was a fragile shield, a thread tying him to Ara, the sacred order of sand, sun, and gods. Kyle stepped from the tent, bare feet meeting hot earth, sand slipping between his toes like a harsh greeting. His flaxen shirt, a dingy white cloth tied at the waist, was all he owned. No pants, no shoes, no hat. Those were for Redstone Temple priests, draped in pristine flaxen robes and gleaming stone amulets. For Cale, a tiller, the shirt was his entire wardrobe, worn from dawn to dusk, through scorching days and frigid nights. He touched the fabric, feeling small tears, scars of days toiling in the fields by the Truckee River. Lyra, his sister, had woven this shirt, each flaxen thread stretched by her calloused hands. He headed to the river, an empty jug on his shoulder, his gaze sweeping the scattered straw tents in the valley. All Tahi dressed alike, men in waist-tied flaxen shirts, women in sleeveless flaxen dresses, loosely embracing their forms like a reluctant hug. No colors, no patterns, just sand and sweat staining the cloth an earthy hue. Kyle thought of the priests, their unsoiled flaxen robes, and wondered if they knew the sting of sand on skin, like invisible blades. He banished the thought. In Tahi, envy was a sin, and Ara demanded acceptance. The Truckee glimmered under the morning sun, but its muddy, fishy reek made Kyle grimace. He knelt, scrubbing his flaxen shirt on a rock, using fine sand as soap, as Mara had taught him. Water splashed, briefly cool, but the heat swiftly devoured the sensation. A mosquito landed on his arm. He swatted, but it returned, relentless as fate. Here, insects were constant companions, flies buzzing near eyes, healers biting at dusk, tiny ants crawling on his skin during field work. Kyle once tried to crush them, but now he shook his head, accepting the desert's refusal to leave him alone. He glanced at Mara, hauling water a few steps away, her flaxen dress clinging with sweat. She wore a grass cord around her wrist, a small snake-shaped stone amulet, not for adornment, but protection. In Tahi, accessories were rituals. Stone amulets repelled spirits. Grass cords signaled devotion to Mara. Kyle touched the hawk amulet on his chest, feeling its weight. He wasn't sure it worked, but he didn't dare remove it. Once, Jiro, the water-hauling boy, lost his amulet, and Torin tied him under the sun for an hour, claiming he'd offended Solus. Kyle shuddered, recalling Jiro's terrified eyes. Sand stuck to Kyle's wet flaxen shirt, an unshakable curse. He hung it on a rock to dry, feeling heat crawl over his bare skin. In Tahi, there were no seasons, only blazing days and icy nights. His flaxen shirt was his year-round uniform, patched when torn, washed when filthy, never replaced. Kyle thought of Mara's tales of distant tribes with leather cloaks and feathered hats. But in the desert, flax was everything, light, breathable, easy to weave. Mara once said, with a sad smile, that flax was Mara's gift, but also a reminder that Tahi belonged to the sand. Kyle hauled water, the jug heavy on his shoulder, and trudged back to the tent. He thought of the day ahead, weeding, sowing millet, enduring Torin's whip. He thought of Ara, the order sustaining the tribe, yet trapping him in an endless loop. The flimsy flaxen shirt, clinging sand, buzzing insects, all were part of this life, a harsh hymn he sang daily. He glanced at Redstone, its red stone walls still shadowed by night, and wondered if a day could come when he'd walk without sand scraping his skin, without flies humming in his ears. Inside the tent, Mara was grinding millet, her hands moving like a ritual. Kyle set the jug down, sitting beside her, picking weeds from the grain. A healer bit his arm. He rubbed it hard, but didn't complain. He looked at Mara, sand glinting in her hair like tiny stars. He wanted to say something, a comfort, a promise, but he stayed silent. In Tahi, words didn't shift sand or repel insects. He gripped his sickle, ready for the field, heart heavy. Outside, the desert awoke, sand shimmering under dawn's light, an endless tapestry awaiting his steps. A sharp scream tore through the quiet of the field, startling Kale, his stone sickle nearly slipping from his grasp. He looked up, the blinding Nevada sun blurring his vision, but he spotted Jiro, the water-hauling boy, sprawled on the cracked earth, clutching his leg, blood staining the sand red. Kyle dropped the sickle and ran, heart pounding, not from the searing heat, but from memories of minor wounds turning deadly in the harsh world of the Tahi tribe. Sand clung to his feet, as if trying to hold him back, but he knelt beside Jiro, struggling to hide the fear in his eyes. Jiro bit his lip, his dirt-streaked face contorted in pain. A jagged rock, hidden in the soil, had sliced deep into his heel when he stumbled under the water jug's weight. Kyle touched the wound, warm blood seeping through his fingers, a stark reminder of life's fragility here. In Tahi, a cut wasn't just pain. It was an invitation for infection, fever, or death if Solus, the sun god, and Mara, the earth goddess, turned away. Kael glanced around, seeing Mara rushing over, but Torin, the overseer, stood distant, his gaze cold as obsidian. "Fetch Sura!" Mara shouted, her voice trembling. Kael nodded, springing up and racing to the healer's tent, sand spraying beneath his feet. He recalled Lyra's fever, when Sura's honey and amulets pulled his sister back from the brink. But he also remembered those who didn't survive, a tiller felled by a viper's bite, a child lost to an infected wound. In Tahi, survival was a gamble, and the desert held the upper hand. Thinking of Jiro, with his bright eyes and innocent smile, Kael prayed, not from faith, but fear, that the boy wouldn't be swallowed by the sand. Inside the tent, Kael found Sura, the aged healer, mixing herbs. He stammered about Jiro, and she followed swiftly, her cloth bag clinking with stone amulets and honey jars. When they returned, Jiro still lay there, Mara gripping his hand, whispering prayers to Mara. Sura knelt, probing the wound, muttering, "The blood is clean, but sand's gotten in." Kael shuddered. Sand, always sand, invaded everything, from millet loaves to wounds, like a desert curse. Sura cleaned the cut with Truckee River water, then applied a paste of honey and crushed grass, chanting a hymn to appease the snake spirit. Kael stood silent, watching Sura work, his heart heavy. He pondered the Tahi's fragile existence. Here, longevity was a rare gift. Many children didn't survive their first year, succumbing to fever or hunger. Those like Kael, in their 20s, were deemed lucky. But luck came at a cost. Sand-grinding teeth, sun-scorching skin, and minor wounds turning lethal. He thought of Corin, the old tiller who'd recently died, living to 40 summers, a marvel in the desert. Yet even Corin prepared for death, clutching a stone amulet, praying for a light heart before Mara's counsel. Sura bound Jiro's foot with a flaxen strip, hanging a hawk-carved stone amulet around his neck. "Keep the wound clean," she told Mara. "Pray. If Solis wills it, the boy will walk again." Kael looked at Jiro, seeing him fight tears, and felt a dull ache. He wanted to scream, to demand why a child endured this, but he stayed silent. In Tahi, questioning was blasphemy. He helped Mara guide Jiro to their tent, the abandoned water jug left on the sand, a stark reminder of vulnerability. Back in the field, Kael gripped the sickle, resuming weeding, but his mind wandered. He thought of Lyra, Jiro, himself. In Tahi, people lived preparing for death. The wealthy, like Redstone's stone carvers, built small tombs with amulets, loaves, and Ara spirits, wooden figures to labor for them in the dream realm. Kael and Lyra had no tombs. If he died, a shallow sand pit by the Truckee would be his rest, with a few breadcrumbs and Mara's prayers. He touched the hawk amulet on his chest, wondering if it could shield his soul from Kael, the beast that devoured heavy hearts. Sand stuck to Kael's hands, wedging under his nails, an unshakable curse. He gazed at Redstone, its red stone walls glowing under the sun, a silent warning. The priests there knew no cuts or fevers. They lived in shade, praying to Solis, offering sacrifices to uphold Ara. But Kael knew even they feared death. In Tahi, none escaped the dream realm, where hearts were weighed and truths laid bare. He thought of Jiro, his smile, and clung to fragile hope that the boy would live to see next season's millet. The sun climbed, burning Kyl's skin through his thin flaxen shirt. He weeded, sowed, each motion a grim rhythm like the desert's pulse. Within, a small crack widened, but he suppressed it. He toiled to survive, to uphold aura, to avoid punishment. When he looked up, seeing Mara lead Jiro to the tent, the boy limping but alive, Kyle felt a spark of hope. The desert was cruel, but sometimes it allowed a small miracle. He tightened his grip on the sickle, pressing on, leaving footprints in the sand, marks that would vanish with the wind, but for now they endured. The scent of baked millet loaves mingled with the arid heat, filling the Black Rock market as Kyle wove through stalls of dried grass and stone. The Nevada desert, though merciless, carved out a small haven for life, where the Tahi traded flaxen cloth, herbs, and stone amulets etched with hawks. Kyle carried a small sack of millet, earned from field labor, to buy medicinal herbs for Lyra. Around him, laughter, haggling, and the crunch of sand underfoot formed a chaotic symphony. But Kyle didn't smile. He'd just heard Mara, the old storyteller, whisper a chilling rumor. The tomb of Corin, the tiller who'd recently died, had been robbed. The Black Rock market nestled under the shadow of red hills, a short distance from the Redstone Temple. Kale paused at Mara's stall, where she displayed stone amulets and a few jugs of palm wine. She looked up, her clouded yet piercing eyes seeming to see through his soul. "Sit, Kyle," she said, her voice low like night wind. He knelt on the sand, setting down his millet sack, feeling heat crawl up his knees. "You've heard about Corin, haven't you?" Mara asked, her fingers tracing a snake-shaped amulet. Kale nodded, heart heavy. He thought of the soul-guiding ritual, when the tribe sent Corin's soul to the dream realm. Now, his tomb, a simple sand pit, had been dug up, its amulets and millet loaves stolen. "No tomb is safe, no matter whose," Mara continued, her tone sorrowful, but not angry. "Sand keeps no secrets. Thieves come at night, taking amulets, loaves, even the flaxen cloth buried with the dead." Kyle shivered. In Tahi, tombs were bridges to the afterlife. Robbing one wasn't just theft. It was a desecration of Ara, the sacred order sustaining the tribe. He imagined Corin's soul, lost in the dream realm, unprotected without amulets, unfed without loaves. "Who would dare?" Kyle asked, voice hoarse. Mara met his gaze, her eyes like red stone under sunlight. "The hungry," she replied, "or those who no longer fear Solis." Kyle bowed his head, sand clinging to his hands like a curse. He thought of Tahi's poverty. People like him and Lyra lived on millet and Truckee River water, but a drought could snatch it all away. He recalled nights of hunger when Lyra split their last bread scrap, promising a better tomorrow. Robbing tombs was a sin, but Kyle understood its lure. A buried loaf could feed a child for a day. A stone amulet could barter for herbs at the market. In Tahi, survival sometimes demanded desperation, and desperation knew no Ara. Mara spoke on, her voice a whisper to the sand. The redstone priests carve curses on the tombs of the wealthy. May sand vipers swallow the thief's soul. But curses don't stop them. Hunger outweighs fear. Kyle thought of the stone carvers' tombs, laden with golden amulets, palm wine, and aura spirits, wooden figures to labor in the dream realm. Those tombs were often robbed, sometimes by the very builders who knew their secrets. Kyle shuddered, recalling Lear, the tiller who vanished after questioning the Tahi king. Had Lear turned thief, consumed by the desert? Kyle scanned the market, seeing weathered faces. Nia, the young mother, haggling for flaxen cloth. Jiro, his foot still bandaged, helping his mother sell herbs. He wondered, had any of them dug sand under moonlight, stealing loaves from the dead to live? He banished the thought, ashamed. But he couldn't deny the truth. In Tahi, the line between survival and sin was as thin as his flaxen shirt. He touched the hawk amulet on his chest, praying he'd never grow hungry enough to forget Ara. "Are you afraid, Kyle?" Mara asked suddenly, pulling him from his thoughts. He met her gaze, unsure how to answer. Afraid of death? Of Kyle, the soul-devouring beast? Or of himself, someday digging sand to survive? "I'm afraid of everything," he confessed, voice faint as a breeze. Mara gave a sad smile. "Good. Fear keeps you alive." She handed him a bundle of medicinal herbs, taking his millet sack, and said, "Care for Lyra, and don't let sand blind you." Kyle rose, herbs in hand, threading through the bustling market. Sand stuck to his flaxen shirt, wedging under his nails, a reminder that the desert never relented. He thought of Corin, the robbed tomb, the thieves lurking in shadows. He thought of Ara, the order the tribe revered, yet a chain binding them to sand and sun. As he left the market, sunlight struck Redstone, setting its red stone walls ablaze like blood. A sand viper slithered past, vanishing into a rock crevice like a warning. Kale clutched the herbs, striding toward the tent, heart heavy but resolved. Today, he wouldn't let the desert win. The colossal red stones loomed like slumbering giants, casting shade over Kale as he treaded the narrow trail to the carved stone gorge, a sacred site near the Redstone Temple. The Nevada desert sprawled before him, sand glinting under the midday sun like a sea of silver light. But Kyle didn't pause to admire it. He carried a jug of palm wine, a rare task entrusted by Mara, delivering an offering to the glyph carvers, those who etched Ara onto stone to preserve the Tahi tribe's sacred order. Each step crunched sand, as if the desert whispered, and Kyle felt the weight of this place, not just from the heat, but from the cryptic symbols he was never permitted to touch. The trail wound through tight rock crevices, where wind howled like the chants of Mara, the earth goddess. Kyle clutched the jug, his thin flaxen shirt clinging to sweat-soaked skin. He'd never been to the carved stone gorge, where glyph carvers worked, but Mara's stories painted vivid images. Chosen from childhood, they learned to carve sacred symbols, hawks, snakes, suns, onto red stone, recording Solus's words, the Tahi king's laws, and Ara's rituals. Kyle thought of Lyra, his sister, who once dreamed of storytelling but was forbidden. He wondered, could he dream of being a glyph carver, or would that dream, too, be buried in sand. The carved stone gorge emerged, a narrow canyon with stone walls adorned with intricate carvings. Kyle halted, awestruck. The etchings, hawks soaring, snakes coiling, suns radiating, seemed alive, shimmering under the sun. He couldn't read them. In Tahi, only a few could decipher script, all glyph carvers living secluded in Redstone's shadow. Kyle touched the hawk amulet on his chest, feeling small. These symbols weren't mere letters. They were power, a bridge to the divine, aura etched in stone to endure forever. A glyph carver, his pristine white flaxen robe unmarred, stepped from the stone's shadow. Old, with silver hair, his hands held a stone chisel with the steadiness of earth. "The offering?" he asked, voice deep as an echo in the gorge. Kyle nodded, placing the jug on a flat rock. The man's gaze, sharp as a blade, seemed to pierce Kyle's thoughts. "You're curious, aren't you?" he said. Kyle flinched, not daring to respond. He yearned to ask about the symbols, their meaning, but fear held him back. In Tahi, curiosity could be a sin, especially for a tiller like him. The glyph carver pointed to a row of symbols, a snake encircling a sun. "This is Solis's word," he said. "It guards aura. But you don't need to understand. Work, pray, keep your heart light." Kyle bowed his head, chest tightening. He thought of Jiro, the injured boy, and Lyra, barely recovered from fever. He thought of Corin, his tomb robbed, and Lear, erased for questioning. These symbols, though beautiful, were chains, upholding aura, but binding Kyle to an endless cycle of sand and sun. He studied the carvings, their seamless flow without gaps or breaks, an endless riddle. Mara had said they could be read left to right or reversed, depending on the hawk's gaze. Kyle didn't know how to unravel them, but he felt their power. In Tahi, writing was magic. Carving a name in stone preserved a soul. Erasing one destroyed it, like Lear. Kyle shivered, wondering if his name would ever be etched or merely buried by sand. The glyph carver resumed work, his chisel's rhythmic taps echoing like the desert's heartbeat. Kyle stood silent, watching him carve a new symbol, a sun with curving rays. He longed to ask its meaning but held his tongue. He was Kyle, a tiller, not a glyph carver. He toiled in fields, sowed millet, breathed sand to survive. Yet, gazing at the symbols, a faint yearning stirred. Not to read, but to leave a mark, to resist the desert's erasure. Sand clung to Kyle's flaxen shirt, wedging under his nails, a reminder he belonged to the earth. He turned back to the trail, leaving the carved stone gorge and its enigmatic symbols. He thought of Aura, the order the glyph carvers safeguarded, yet a burden weighing on him. Lyra, Jiro, the entire tribe. He thought of Redstone, where the Tahi king ruled, and priests shaped fates with stone knives and blood. As he walked, a hawk soared overhead, its piercing cry a message from Solis. Kyle gripped his amulet, heart heavy, but he didn't stop. The desert waited, and he pressed on, if only to carve his name in sand, even for a day. In his dream, Kale stood in a lush millet field, free of sand, unscorched by searing rays, with only a cool breeze caressing his skin. He spread his arms, laughing, but the earth cracked open, sand surging like waves, swallowing everything, dragging him into darkness. Kyle jolted awake, breath ragged, the flaxen mat beneath him soaked with night sweat. Dawn's light seeped through the straw tent's gaps, heralding another day in the Nevada desert, where the Tahi tribe waged their endless battle with sand, sun, and Ara, the sacred order Kyle wasn't sure he belonged to. He sat up, hand grazing his hawk amulet, heart churning, wondering, was that dream a warning from Solus, or merely his own fears? He stepped from the tent, sand crunching under bare feet, a harsh greeting from the desert. Lyra, his sister, was already awake, grinding millet in the corner, her hands moving in a somber ritual. Kyle watched her, recalling the fever that nearly claimed her, feeling a dull ache. He wanted to ask if she ever dreamed of a sandless place, but he stayed silent. In Tahi, dreams were a luxury, and words didn't shift the sun. He pulled his flaxen shirt over his head, the thin fabric clinging to his skin, and headed to the Truckee River for water, stone sickle tied at his waist. The river glimmered, but its muddy, fishy stench made Kale wince. He knelt, scrubbing his flaxen shirt on a rock, fine sand serving as soap, as Lyra had taught. A fly landed on his arm. He swatted, but it returned, stubborn as fate. Kyle thought of his dream, the green field, wondering if it was the millet garden, where pure souls entered after the dream realm. He quickly banished the thought. The millet garden was for those like Corin, the old tiller who lived for Ara. Kyle, with fleeting rebellious thoughts, wasn't sure he was worthy. He hauled water, the jug heavy on his shoulder, and trudged back to the tent. On the way, he saw Jiro, his foot still bandaged, dragging a small jug, his eyes bright but weary. Kyle wanted to help, but recalled the law. Each bore their own burden. He reflected on Tahi's harshness. A small cut, like Jiro's, could kill. A fever, like Lyra's, could steal breath. A mistake, like Lear's, could erase your name from the sand. Here, survival was a miracle, but it came at a cost. Sand grinding teeth, sun scorching skin, and ever-present fear. Back at the tent, Kyle set the jug down, sitting beside Lyra, helping her pick weeds from the millet. He thought of the carved stone gorge, where glyph carvers etched Ara into stone. He thought of the Black Rock Market, where rumors of robbed tombs spread. He thought of the Redstone Temple, where the Tahi king ruled, and priests offered sacrifices with stone knives and blood. All were part of Ara, but Kyle wasn't sure what it meant for him. He worked, prayed, survived, but for what? To keep his heart light before Mara's council, or merely to avoid being swallowed by the desert? Sand clung to Kyle's hands, wedging under his nails, an unshakable curse. He looked at Lyra, sand glinting in her hair like tiny stars. He wanted to speak, a comfort, a promise, but he stayed silent. He gripped his sickle, heading to the field where Torin waited with his whip. The sun climbed, burning his skin through the thin flaxen shirt. He weeded, sowed, each motion a grim rhythm like the desert's pulse. But within, a small crack widened, like the earth splitting in his dream. He thought of Mara, the old storyteller, who said fear kept you alive. He thought of Sura, the healer, who believed solace decided who lived or died. He thought of Jiro, Lyra, Corin, even Lear, people tested by the desert, some enduring, some erased. Kyle didn't want to vanish. He wanted to leave a mark, even if just a millet row, a prayer, or a name scratched in sand. But he knew, in Tahi, marks didn't last. Wind would blow, sand would cover, and only Ara remained. Noon came, and Kale rested under a boulder, biting into a gritty millet loaf. He gazed at Redstone, its red stone walls casting a warning shadow. He thought of his dream, the green field, wondering if it truly existed or was a desert mirage. He thought of Ara, the order he served, yet a chain binding him to sand and sun. He wanted to believe his life had purpose, that days sweating in fields, breathing dust, were for something greater. But he wasn't sure. As the sun tilted west, Kyle rose, sickle in hand. He resumed weeding, sowing, each act a defiance of the desert. I'm still here. He saw Jiro hauling water from afar, Lyra weaving cloth in the tent. He saw Mara at the Black Rock Market, telling tales to children. They were Tahi, Ara, survivors. And though Kyle's dream might dissolve like sand, he pressed on, leaving footprints in the dry earth, fragile marks. But for today, they were enough. The sky darkened abruptly, as if Solus, the sun god, had drawn a black veil across Black Rock Valley. Kyle was sowing millet in the barren field by the Truckee River, stone sickle in hand, when a scorching gust howled, whipping sand into furious, spiraling columns. A sandstorm, the desert's ruthless predator, was descending on Nevada. Kyle looked up, heart pounding, as Torin, the overseer, bellowed, "Run! To the tents!" Around him, the Tahi tribe erupted in panic, dropping tools, shielding faces, and scrambling for shelter. Kyle gripped his hawk amulet, sand already stinging his eyes, and ran, his mind reeling before the desert's might, untamed by any aura. Sand lashed Kyle's skin like needles, tearing at his thin flaxen shirt. He covered his mouth, breathing labored, sand clogging his nose as if to choke him. He glimpsed Lyra, his sister, dragging Jiro, the injured boy, toward a tent, her flaxen dress flapping like a bird's wings in the gale. Mara, the aged storyteller, stumbled behind, clutching her bag of stone amulets. Kyle wanted to help, but the wind shoved him back, as if the desert mocked human frailty. He staggered to his tent, sand flooding his eyes, ears ringing with the storm's roar and the tribe's scattered cries. Inside the tent, Kyle dropped to his knees, pulling a flaxen cloth over the entrance, but sand seeped through gaps, coating the floor like a living carpet. Lyra and Jiro had made it, gasping, faces streaked with grime. Kyle met Lyra's gaze, catching a flicker of fear, yet she held Jiro close, whispering, "It'll pass." He wanted to believe her, but the wind outside roared like a beast, reminding him that in Tahi, nature wasn't a companion. It was a lord, mightier than the Tahi king, mightier than Ara. He thought of his dream, a green field free of sand and storms, but reality was only darkness and the desert's wail. Kyle recalled past storms, when the tribe lost millet, tents were shredded, and some never returned. Mara, her voice trembling, once said sandstorms were Solus's wrath, punishing those who disrupted Ara. Kael wondered, who had erred? Him, with his fleeting rebellious thoughts? Lyra, with her buried dreams? Or the tribe, for robbing Corin's tomb? He touched his hawk amulet, praying, not from faith, but fear, for Mara's protection, for Solus's mercy. Yet deep down, he knew. The desert heeded no prayers. It acted, cruel and blind. Lyra began sweeping sand from the tent, though the wind still forced it in. Kael helped, pushing sand through the door with his hands, only for it to return, an indefatigable foe. He glanced at Jiro, curled up, his bandaged foot still, eyes glinting with worry. Kael thought of Tahi's fragility. A storm could ruin crops, dry the truckee, or bury the weak. He remembered Jiro's injury, Lyra's fever, Corin's death before the storm. Here, survival was a miracle, but it came at a cost. Sand in eyes, sun in blood, fear in heart. The wind softened, but sand fell like rain. Kael peered through the cloth, seeing the sky brighten, yet Black Rock Valley was now a sea of sand, burying fields, tents, footprints. He thought of the carved stone gorge, where glyph carvers etched Ara into stone. Could a storm erase those symbols? He thought of the Black Rock Market, where tales of robbed tombs spread. Could sand hide the thieves' sins? He thought of the Redstone Temple, where the Tahi king and priests prayed to uphold Ara. But if Ara couldn't stop a storm, what was its worth? Lyra stood, resuming millet grinding, as if the storm were a mere pause. Kael watched, seeing her strength, not of red stone, but of sand, returning despite the wind's push. He helped, picking weeds from the grain, sand grating under his nails. He thought of Mara, who said fear kept you alive. He thought of Sura, who believed Solus shaped fates. He thought of Jiro, Lyra, himself, tested by the desert, yet rising, if only to face tomorrow. The storm ceased, leaving a heavy silence. Kael stepped from the tent, sand cloaking his shoulders like a mantle. The field was a chaotic expanse, young millet buried. Torrin stood there, whip in hand, eyes icy. "Start over," he growled. Kael bowed his head, gripping the sickle, and began digging sand, searching for surviving millet seeds. He saw Lyra hauling water from the river, Jiro sweeping sand from the tent. They were Tahi, Ara, unyielding. Sand clung to Kael's skin, tangling in his hair, a reminder the desert always prevailed. He thought of his dream, the green field, wondering if it truly existed or was a mirage. He thought of Ara, the order he served, yet a chain binding him to sand and sun. As he sowed a millet seed, sand fell from his hand, glinting in the sun, a fragile promise. Kael didn't know what tomorrow held, another storm or a miracle. But today, he sowed, he lived, ensuring sand wasn't the only tale of his existence. The drumbeat thundered from the stone plaza, like the heartbeat of the Nevada desert, drawing Kael from his straw tent into a rare, torchlit evening. The Tahi tribe gathered around a massive bonfire in Black Rock Valley, holding the planting festival to thank Mara, the earth goddess, after a sandstorm ravaged their fields. Kyle stood amid the crowd, his thin flaxen shirt dusted with sand, clutching his hawk amulet, his heart pulsing with each drumbeat. Lyra, his sister, stood beside him, her eyes gleaming for the first time since her fever. Jiro, his foot healed, danced barefoot around the fire, laughing. Music, raw, fierce rhythms, was a rare balm, soothing wounds left by sand and sun. The crowd swayed, the beat of sand bison hide drums echoing, blending with the clack of stone sticks and Mara's low melodic chants, the old storyteller's voice rising and falling. Kyle watched the drummers, chosen for their skill, their hands moving like gusts, crafting rhythms that crashed like waves on red rock. Drums weren't mere instruments in Tahi. They were a bridge to the divine, the breath of Ara, the sacred order sustaining the tribe. Kyle felt the beat in his chest, as if it stirred something deep within. A part of him lulled to sleep by the weight of sand and toil. Mara stepped into the circle's center, her flaxen dress billowing, her warm voice weaving a tale with the drumbeat. When Mara shaped the earth, she drummed to summon sand, she sang. When Solus lit the sun, he struck stone to command light. Kyle listened, thinking of days in the fields, sowing millet under Torin's glare. The drums reminded him that, though harsh, Tahi life had a rhythm: work, prayer, survival. He saw Lyra swaying to the music, Jiro dancing as if his injury were forgotten. Music was magic, not erasing sand, but lightening it, if only for one night. The drummers quickened, the beat pounding like a heart before a storm. A group of women, led by Nia, the young mother, began to dance, their barefoot steps stomping sand into small swirls. Kyle wanted to join, but he stood still, fearing his steps might disrupt Ara. He recalled the priests at Redstone drumming during the soul-guiding ritual, their rhythm slow, solemn, whispering to the dream realm. Here, the beat was laughter, life, a defiance of the desert. We're still here. Kyle reflected on music's role in Tahi. It wasn't just entertainment. It was ritual, a link to Mara and Solus. When sandstorms loomed, drums warned. When children were born, drums welcomed. When someone died, drums ushered souls to the dream realm. Mara had said drums were the Tahi's first voice, predating the glyphs of carved stone gorge. Rhythm was a language needing no symbols, speaking joy, fear, hope. Kale touched his hawk amulet, feeling the drumbeat pulse through his fingers, wondering, could he find joy in sand, like Lyra and Jiro? Lyra tugged his hand, voice soft. Dance, Kale. He shook his head, but her gaze, steady as red stone under sun, held firm. He stepped into the circle, barefoot steps stamping sand, clumsy, but finding the rhythm. The drums guided, an invisible river pulling him into the dance. He saw Nia, Mara, others, their faces aglow under torchlight. Sand clung to his skin, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was part of the dance, the beat, Ara. Kyle smiled, for the first time in days, feeling life surge through him. The festival surged on, Mara's chants soaring, singing of green millet seasons, rivers that never dried. Kyle wondered if music was how Tahi touched his dreamed green field. He thought of the Black Rock Market, where tomb-robbing rumors spread, and carved stone gorge, where glyph carvers etched Ara. Music didn't erase those, but it lightened them, like Lyra weaving cloth despite sand-crusted hands. He saw Jiro dancing on newly healed feet and felt a spark of hope, small but enough to carry on. Sand crunched under Kyle's feet, wedging under his nails, a reminder the desert never left. He glanced at Redstone, its red stone walls silently watching. The drums slowed, like a long exhale, and the festival waned. Kale stood still, sweat glinting on his skin, heart light but not empty. He saw Lyra smile, Jiro clapping to the final beat. Music had given them a night without sand, without sun, only rhythm and life. As the crowd dispersed, Kyle walked to the tent, torchlight fading behind. Sand cloaked his shoulders, a desert mantle. He thought of tomorrow, the storm-buried field, millet to Rizal. But tonight, the drumbeat echoed in his heart, a promise that, despite the desert's cruelty, Tahi sang, danced, lived. He gripped his hawk amulet, treading through moonlit sand, leaving footprints, marks that would vanish, but the music endured, like the tribe's heartbeat. The wind stilled, but sand fell like fine rain, blanketing the storm-ravaged millet field, as if the Nevada desert were rewriting the Tahi tribe's story. Kyle knelt on cracked earth, stone sickle in hand, digging through sand to salvage surviving millet seeds. The sun blazed, its light sharp as a blade, but Kyle didn't pause. Not for Ara, but for Torin, the overseer, standing steps away, his leather whip dangling at his hip. Kyle felt Torin's gaze, not human, but hawk-like, ready to swoop if he faltered. A careless whisper from Jiro that morning, about Torin hoarding a larger millet share, had set Kyle's blood boiling, and now he faced the man, not with a sickle, but with words. Kyle rose, wiping sweat, sand clinging to his hands like a curse. "Torin!" he called, voice low but firm. Torin turned, eyes glinting like obsidian. "What do you want, Kale?" he growled, stepping closer, the whip twitching. Kale gripped his hawk amulet, heart pounding. He knew the danger of speaking out, but images of Lyra splitting a meager bread scrap, Jiro's hunger, and Mara's tales of tombs robbed from poverty pushed him past fear. "Why do you keep our millet?" Kyle asked, voice trembling but unyielding. "We work, we sweat, but you take the bulk, leaving us sand." The field fell silent, Mara, Jiro, and Nia pausing, their eyes wide with dread. Torin smirked, a smile as cold as a desert night. "You dare question me? I serve the Tahi king, uphold Ara. My millet goes to Redstone, so Solus doesn't burn us all." Kyle clenched the sickle, thinking of the temple, where priests lived in shade, their white flaxen robes untouched by sand. He thought of the Tahi king, a golden silhouette he'd never seen, ruling through Ara while Kale starved. "Ara doesn't feed Jiro," Kale said, voice rising. "It doesn't ease Lyra's exhaustion. It only feeds you and the temple." Torin advanced, whip raised, lashing the sand beside Kale, dust exploding. "Silence, or you'll end like Lear," he roared. Kale shuddered, recalling Lear, the tiller erased for questioning the king. He wanted to retreat, but thoughts of Lyra, Giro, and the storm-buried field held him firm. "Lear spoke truth," Kale whispered, voice soft but sharp. "And you know it." Torin raised the whip again, but Mara stepped forward, her voice resonant as red stone. "Enough, Torin. You're not Solis." Torin froze, eyes flashing, but he turned away, leaving Kale gasping, heart drumming like festival beats. Kyle knelt, resuming his sand digging, but his mind churned like a gale. He thought of Tahi's injustices. Tillers like him and Lyra toiled to exhaustion, breathing sand, sweating blood, yet received only gritty bread scraps. Priests and Torin, close to the Tahi king, lived in shade, ate sandless loaves, drank palm wine. Ara, the sacred order, was their excuse, but Kyle saw it as chains, keeping him and his kind at the bottom while redstone gleamed above. He thought of the carved stone gorge, where glyphs safeguarded Ara, and the black rock market, where hunger drove tomb robbing. Sand clung to Kale's skin, tangling in his hair, a reminder the desert cared not for justice. He glanced at Lyra, sowing seeds nearby, her eyes worried yet resolute. He saw Giro, hauling water with newly healed feet, and Mara, murmuring prayers to Mara. They were Tahi, Ara, but also hungry, weary, afraid. Kyle thought of the planting festival, when drums let him forget sand, wondering if one day music could not just comfort, but change. Torin returned, eyes still sharp, but he didn't strike. "Work," he commanded, and Kyle bowed his head, digging sand, sowing seeds. He thought of Lear, Corin, those the desert swallowed. He thought of Giro's smile, Lyra's strength. He wanted to scream, to shatter Ara, but he knew the cost. Torin's whip, the priest's knives, or the dream realm's void. He only sowed, each seed a small defiance. "I'm still alive." The sun tilted west, its light softer, but still fierce. Kyle gazed at redstone, shadows creeping up its red stone walls like a warning. He thought of the Tahi king, Solis, Ara. He thought of his green field dream, the festival's drums, the gorge's glyphs. He didn't know if he could change anything, but today he'd spoken, if only a whisper. As he rose, sand fell from his flaxen shirt, glinting in the sun, a fragile promise. Kyle pressed on, sickle in hand, leaving footprints in the earth, marks that would vanish, but today they were his voice. The sun sank behind the red hills, bathing Black Rock Valley in a fiery orange glow, as if the Nevada desert exhaled its final blaze of the day. Kyle knelt in the millet field, driving his stone sickle into cracked earth, sowing new seeds after the sandstorm's devastation. Sand grated under his knees, clinging to his thin flaxen shirt like an inseparable companion. But today, Kyle felt a shift, a faint spark within, not from the sunset's radiance, but from the bold words he'd spoken to Torin that morning. Though the overseer's whip still loomed as a threat, Kale had voiced the truth, and that, however small, was a seed of hope. He paused, wiping sweat, sand sticking to his hands like a curse. His gaze swept the field. Lyra, his sister, hauled water from the Truckee River, her flaxen dress fluttering like a bird's wings. Jiro, the boy once injured, now helped Mara weed, his smile shining despite sand-streaked cheeks. Kyle thought of the planting festival, where drums let them forget sand, and the Black Rock Market, where whispers of robbed tombs revealed desperation. He thought of the carved stone gorge, where sacred glyphs preserved aura, and the red stone temple, where the Tahi king ruled in golden splendor. Tahi was a harsh world, but today, Kyle saw the strength of people like him. Tillers, weavers, survivors. He planted a millet seed, careful as if placing a vow into the earth. The confrontation with Torin still haunted him. His words, "Ara doesn't feed Jiro," were a crack in the wall of Ara, the sacred order the tribe revered. He recalled Mara's gaze as she stopped Torin, and Lyra's, worried yet proud. Kyle didn't want to be Lear, erased for questioning, but he refused to stay silent forever. He thought of the injustice, gritty bread scraps for tillers, while priests ate pristine loaves. He thought of Jiro, Lyra, those who sweated for Ara, but reaped only sand. Sand coated Kyle's hands, wedging under his nails, a reminder the desert never relented. He glanced at the Truckee, where Lyra washed flaxen cloth, recalling days she split bread to keep them from starving. He thought of Sura, the healer, saving Lyra and Jiro with honey and stone amulets. He thought of the soul-guiding ritual, sending Corin to the dream realm and the robbed tomb, a wound in Ara. Tahi was a cycle, labor, prayer, fear. But today, Kyle felt a new rhythm, like festival drums, urging him to find meaning in sand. He rose, sickle in hand, and joined Jiro. The boy looked up, beaming. "You feeling better?" Kyle asked softly. Jiro nodded, pointing to his bandaged foot. "Sura says Mara listened." Kyle smiled, but his heart was heavy. He wanted to believe in Mara, Solus, Ara, but he'd seen too much: hunger, injustice, sand. He thought of his greenfield dream, a place without scorching sun, wondering if Tahi could change, even slightly, so Jiro wouldn't starve, so Lyra wouldn't weave to exhaustion. Mara approached, hands trembling, eyes sharp. "You spoke what none dared," she whispered, voice like night wind. "But be careful, Kale. Ara doesn't break easily, but you might." Kyle nodded, feeling her words weight. He thought of Torin, the whip, the Redstone Temple, where priests could punish a wayward word. But he also thought of Lyra, Jiro, Mara, those who stood with him, if only in glances. Tahi wasn't just sand and sun. It was community, people sowing seeds, dancing to drums, surviving together. Kale returned to the field, planting seeds, each a defiance. "We will live." He thought of festival music, gorge glyphs, the hawk amulet on his chest. He thought of injustice, but also hope, small, like a millet seed, yet able to sprout if the earth allowed. He saw Lyra smile while hauling water, Jiro singing a child's tune. They were Tahi, Ara, but also dreamers, despite sand-buried dreams. Dusk fell, the orange light softening, a desert solace. Kyle kept sewing, sand glinting under his hands like tiny stars. He thought of Corin, Lear, those the desert swallowed. He thought of Sura, Mara, those keeping the tribe alive. He didn't know what tomorrow held, storms, hunger, or miracles. But today, he'd spoken, sown, lived. As he rose, leaving the sickle in the earth, sand fell from his flaxen shirt, shimmering in the fading light. He walked to the tent, leaving footprints in the field, fragile marks, but proof that, despite the desert's cruelty, Kyle was here, still hoping. Beneath a twinkling dome of stars, like stone amulets suspended in the sky, Kyle sat by a small fire outside his straw tent, its flickering glow dancing across his face, streaked with sand and sweat. The Nevada desert lay silent, only the wind whispering through the red hills of Black Rock Valley, like tales spun by Mara, the earth goddess. Kyle held a scrap of millet bread, sand crunching between his teeth, and watched Lyra, his sister, weaving linen inside the tent, her silhouette cast on the wall like a living mural. Tonight, after days of sandstorms, a clash with Torin, and the festival's drumbeats, Kyle reflected, not just on a single day, but on his legacy, Tahi's, and that of those sowing seeds in sand. He thought of the desert's harshness, where the sun cut like a blade, sand bore curses, and the Truckee River offered a fragile promise. He recalled days sowing millet, breathing dust, enduring Torin's whip, praying solace wouldn't scorch. He remembered Lyra's fever, Jiro's wound, Corin's robbed tomb, scars on Tahi, not just skin deep, but soul deep. The desert spared no mercy. It tested, it took, leaving footprints erased by wind. Yet Kyle saw, amid sand and sun, the Tahi endured, steadfast as the red rocks under the heavens. He touched his hawk amulet, pondering Ara, the sacred order he'd once blindly served. Ara drove him to sow, Lyra to weave, Mara to tell tales. But Ara was also injustice, gritty bread scraps for tillers, while redstone priests ate pristine loaves. He recalled confronting Torin, daring to speak truth, and Mara's gaze, a warning laced with faith. Kyle didn't want to be Lear, erased by the desert, but he refused endless silence. His words, though small, were a seed, and seeds could sprout, even in parched earth. He gazed at Redstone, its red stone walls swallowed by night, and thought of the Tahi king, a golden figure he'd never seen. He thought of the carved stone gorge, where sacred glyphs told Ara's story, and the Black Rock Market, where hunger spurred tomb robbing. Tahi was a world of mystery, where writing was magic, music was breath, and death was a journey through the dream realm. Kyle feared Kyle, the soul-devouring beast, but he also feared living without a mark, not in stone, but in Lyra's, Jiro's, or Mara's hearts. He thought of the planting festival, where drums erased sand, and the soul-guiding ritual, where Tahi sent Corin off with loaves and amulets. He thought of Sura, the healer, saving lives with honey and charms, and Mara, keeping Tahi's memories alive. They were Tahi's legacy, not Redstone, not the king, but people like Lyra, resilient despite exhaustion. Jiro, smiling through pain. Mara, storytelling with failing eyes. Kyle wanted to be part of that legacy, even as a tiller, a grain of sand in the desert. Sand grated under Kyle hands, wedging under his nails, a reminder the desert never left. He looked at Lyra, watching her pause her weaving to join him by the fire, its light illuminating her face. "What are you thinking, Kale?" she asked, voice soft as a breeze. He smiled, not answering at once. He thought of his green field dream, festival drums, his bold words to Torin. He wanted to say he thought of them. Tahi, sowing seeds, dancing, surviving. But he only said, "Tomorrow." Lyra nodded, as if she understood. They sat in silence, fire flickering, sand glinting under stars. Kyle thought of injustice, hunger, Ara's chains. But he also saw hope, not in the temple, not in the king, but in Lyra, Jiro, Mara, himself. They were Tahi, drums, millet sprouting from sand. He thought of their legacy, not gold or stone, but resilience. A story of those who didn't yield, despite the desert's cruelty, Ara's inequity. He rose, sand falling from his flaxen shirt like tiny stars returning to earth. He gazed at the field, where today's sown millet slept beneath sand, awaiting germination. He thought of Corin, Lear, those the desert claimed, yet left lessons. To live is to sow, dance, speak, even once. Kyle took Lyra's hand, leading her into the tent, leaving the fire to fade. The desert breathed, sand fell, but Tahi lived on. Their story, harsh, mysterious, unjust, a flame that never died. Under the stars, Kyle lay on his flaxen mat, hearing wind sing through the valley. He didn't know if tomorrow brought storms, hunger, or miracles. But he knew, though sand might erase footprints, though Ara weighed heavy, Tahi would endure. Through Lyra, Jiro, those sowing and dancing. Their legacy wasn't immortality, but the strength to rise, resow, sing amid sand. As Kyle closed his eyes, he smiled, knowing Tahi's tale, however small, was part of humanity's, a resilient anthem, echoing forever across the desert.